Hello everyone, it's AG, and I thought I might as well just switch it up today and do some promo at the start. I have an anime and manga podcast, and it's called Otaku Field Notes. I have 2 episodes out. It's a bit sporadic in terms of scheduling at the moment, but after my finals in a couple of weeks, I promise that it will be a bit more consistent. I'll have more time to prepare and stuff like that. Also, I got so much awesome, cool, rare, obscure manga, and I'm so excited to talk about that as well. So yeah, if you want to watch the 2 episodes that are live now, you can check the link in the description box, and I'll put like a card somewhere on on I'll put a card somewhere on the screen now. So in any case, today I present to you a list of vintage horror anime curated by yours truly. In particular, I will be talking about OVAs, or original video animations. So this list is definitely not exhaustive, but I plan on making future parts as I kind of go through what it seems like never-ending list of both horror anime and manga. So if you think that there are any pieces out there that deserve my attention, then please feel free to leave those suggestions in the comment section below. So for this video, I had initially planned to just jump right into it, give you all of my recommendations, but then I thought it would be a bit more fun to, roll back the tape a smidge and take a fleeting look at the beginnings of horror as a genre within anime and manga. So horror really started to make a name for itself within manga in the mid-1960s, with most notably Shigeru Mizuki's version of Gegege no Kitaro, which was originally known as Hakaba Kitaro, which translates to Kitaro of the graveyard. And for those wondering, Gegege is actually the onomatopoeia for a ghost cackling, so like gek gek gek. Oh gosh. Anyway, this manga appeared as a one-shot in Weekly Shonen magazine in 1965, after which it got serialized for several years in various magazines. Gegege no Kitaro is a series that heavily draws from Japanese mythology, especially the part that concerns yokai, which are a class of monsters, ghosts, spirits within Japanese folklore. The series centers around a yokai boy named Kitaro, who was born in a cemetery and whose goal it is to unite the world of humans and the yokai. And so throughout he faces several yokai as well as ghouls from other countries such as the Transylvanian Dracula. Now, Gegege Kitaro is considered to be a classic within Japanese horror anime and is seen as the series that really managed to popularize the use of yokai within manga and beyond. So I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, just so you know. Anyway, it might not come as a surprise if I tell you that Mizuki as a child was heavily influenced by Japanese folklore, mythology, and thus the yokai. One book that stood out to him in particular was Tono Monogatari, Tales of Tono. This book was created by Kunio Yanagita, who feared that Japan was losing both its history and culture due to the rapid industrialization that Japan was undergoing during the Meiji era, thus late 19th century and early 20th century. And so he decided that he would set out to the north of Japan to a town called Tono, and he would just write down all of the folk tales that were previously passed on orally there. And the reason I'm telling you all this is that towards the end of Mizuki's life, he passed away a couple of years back, he decided to adapt some of these stories, and this one actually got translated into the English and was published a couple of weeks back by Drawn Quarterly, and they were kind enough to send me a digital review copy back in January, and I really enjoyed it. So if Japanese mythology, folklore is something that you're interested in, I would highly recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description box to that. Also, this isn't sponsored or anything, I just wanted to mention it. Now, besides Mizuki, there were also a couple of other mangaka who entered the horror manga scene in the 60s and 70s, who eventually really went on to establish the horror genre and also inspire the next generations of horror mangaka such as Junji Ito and Shuzo Oshimi. To mention a couple of other big players, we have, for instance, KAZUO UMEZU, who you may know from The Drifting Classroom. I've mentioned this before a couple of times, but he was actually one of the big influences of Junji Ito, and I think that if you have read both of their works, you can definitely see similarities there, so that's really cool. In Japan, UMEZU is really known as a jack of all trades because besides being a mangaka, he's also an author and a singer. And interestingly enough, his manga also reflects his versatility. He's known for both his disturbing and gory horror manga and also for his gag manga about snot and toilet jokes. Besides the signature blood and gore that is prevalent in his horror manga, he's also known for writing long series that incorporate elements from different genres, such as science fiction. For instance, The Drifting Classroom that I mentioned earlier is a story that focuses on elementary school children who get transported with their school building to an absolute wasteland with creepy, weird animal beasts and all sorts of things. And quite early on, the story kind of evolves into a Lord of the Flies type of situation. There's also Kami no hidarite, Akuma no migite, which translates to God's left hand and the devil's right hand, and this is a story that centers around a boy named So who has the ability to see supernatural and horrific events in his dreams, which eventually come to fruition in reality. There's also Hideshi Hino, who came a couple of years later than UMEZU. He is known for pieces such as Hell Baby and Panorama of Hell. Hino was born after the end of the Second World War, and so his experiences growing up in post-war Japan and other horrific events in his life really inform his work. I haven't really read any of his full works, but I do know that a lot of his manga does contain quite some body horror, body gore, and that his art style is quite distinct, and the latter is something that I always think is very interesting. His art doesn't really look like, I don't really know a good way of saying this, but I guess your run-of-the-mill manga, neither vintage or contemporary, and it actually seems to lean more towards Western kids cartoon type of art styles. So if you're a person who is very interested in manga that has a very distinctive style, then Hideshi Hino's work might be right up your alley. Then the final person I want to talk about for now is Jirou Tsunoda, and he is the creator behind KYOUFU SHINBUN, which translates to horror news. This is a manga about a boy named Rei who all of a sudden starts to receive the KYOUFU SHINBUN Every Morning, which is a newspaper that foresees deaths and catastrophes. This series was incredibly popular and ended up being responsible for what is now known as the occult boom that spread throughout Japan in the 70s. It seems that to this day the series remains quite relevant because actually last year a live adaptation of this manga was made. So if you're interested in that, it has the same name, KYOUFU SHINBUN, so I'm sure you'll be able to find a link somewhere on the internet to watch it. There are also 2 anime OVA episodes available on YouTube, but unfortunately they don't have subtitles yet. But yes, nevertheless, I'll leave a link in the description box below. One important thing that I would like to note is that horror manga never was a genre that was solely targeted towards boys and men in Japan. And this is because the rise of horror manga actually coincided with the rise of the, I guess you could call it the rise of the female mangaka. And if you would like to know more about the latter, I actually made a video pertaining to that, more specifically the year 24 group and the expansion of shoujo manga due to the large influx of women into the industry. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description box below. Anyway, to just give you, I guess, some cliff notes. So in the 60s, or should I rather say late 60s, 70s, there was a huge influx of young women who started to write shoujo manga, and previously it was mainly men who wrote stories about, you know, helpless young women with tragic lives who are just waiting for their prince or knight in shining white armor. I don't know what it is, but you know what I mean. Those type of stories essentially. And these women essentially came in and started exploring different genres such as historical fiction, fantasy, science fiction, and also horror. So I just wanted to mention 2 important pieces of that time. You have Yuregari, Ghost Hunting by Masako Sone. She's actually considered to be one of the masters of occult romance. And then there's also Se Rosarindo, Saint Rosalind by Masako Watanabe, who is known as one of the pioneers within shoujo horror and shoujo as a whole. So Yuregari is the story of a blind boy who is an esper with supernatural abilities, and Se Rosarindo is the story of a girl who I guess you could classify as a demon child because essentially everyone around her just dies. Oh, by the way, I should say that I will be reviewing Se Rosarindo because I actually got a copy of it quite recently. I can actually show you. Let's roll on my chair back. Oh. Yes, here we go. This is the demon child I was talking about. Now, unfortunately, the shoujo horror genre has definitely seen better days. Currently, it's incredibly underappreciated. Its prime was many decades ago. Almost all shoujo horror magazines have now gone defunct, but I personally feel that there are loads and loads of hidden gems out there. So as my Japanese is getting better, I'm really excited to be making more videos about them in the future. Also, in particular, I'm working on a video concerning the history of shoujo horror. So yeah, hit the bell button if you would like to receive a notification once that finally goes up. It might take a while because it's just a lot of information to process. A lot of it, essentially everything is in Japanese as well. So yeah, it might take a while, but I am working really hard on it. Okay, now the horror genre within manga really started to pick up in the 70s. However, it wasn't until the 1980s that you really see it, I guess, kind of bleeding into anime, and I don't know exactly why that was the case, but it's definitely a very interesting phenomenon because there was a literal boom of horror OVA and films with both Studio Madhouse and Pierrot at the helm of that. Tons of pieces were created, and I can't really say anything with regards to their popularity, but seeing the amount that was being produced, I can't help but think that there must have been a substantial amount of interest. What I can, however, tell you with certainty is that many of these OVAs and films have not withstood the time and have fallen into obscurity, which is why I'm making this video. It wasn't until the 2000s that we really start to see, or at least what I personally perceive as an increased trust in horror stories within anime, in the form of a stark increase in long-running and successful anime series such as Elfenlied, Hellsing, and Berserk. But you know, that's a story for another day, because today I will be going over a couple of pieces that came from the OVA and movie boom of the 80s and 90s. So I am starting with Memories. This is a movie that was created by Studio Madhouse in the 90s, and it's really cool in the way that it consists of 3 completely separate stories that cover a range of differing genres. I'm pretty sure that each story also got directed by a different person, and so you can very clearly see the different, I guess, sort of artistic choices that were made. And I also think that it's just a great showcase of the range that Madhouse already had in the 90s. So if it's only for that fact, I would highly recommend you check out this one. In terms of horror anime, I particularly wanted to talk about the first story, which is called Magnetic Rose. It's a science fiction horror story set in space, and it centers around a group of scrap collectors who are collecting scrap in space, and all of a sudden they receive this distress call. Space law requires for them to respond, and so 2 men of the group set out to investigate this very peculiar space vessel. I personally really like this one. It's actually one of my favorites of this list. I enjoyed the animation, the tone, the coloring as well, and I felt that the soundtrack, which is, I believe, mostly classical music, actually fit the story quite well, and especially in the scarier parts as well. It's very interesting, to say the least. Now, a lot of people know Rumiko Takahashi for her pieces such as Urusei Yatsura, Inuyasha. I didn't watch it growing up. We didn't have it on Dutch TV. And Yes, Rama 1/2. And these stories are mainly science fiction, adventure, fantasy. But Takahashi also has written a couple of short horror manga, and one of those is Laughing Target. It received an OVA adaptation in the 80s, and it centers around this high school boy named Yuzuru Shiga, who is part of the Shiga clan. When he was still a very small child, his father and his aunt decided that he should marry his cousin Asuza, I guess to preserve the family legacy. I know. Incest, great. Okay. 10 years later, however, his aunt, who is Azusa's mother, mysteriously passes away, and so Azusa is sent to live with Yuzuru and his parents. Azusa is adamant on keeping this promise of marriage. However, Yuzuru now has a girlfriend and he's not really okay with getting married to his cousin. And this clash is the event that sort of sparks the start of very peculiar events. And that's all I'll say about it, because it's an OVA and really short. I personally thought it was quite alright. It's not too scary, but it's definitely one of the better ones out there. Next up, I have Biohunter, and this is an OVA adaptation of a manga with, I believe, the same name. It centers around two molecular biologists who fight against humans who have been infected by viruses that have turned these people into, I guess, disgusting mutated monsters. I'm just going to give you a heads up. This is definitely not an amazing anime. It certainly gets goofy in a lot of places, especially the middle and the end. But since it's not that long, it's quite alright to watch. And I personally found that those goofy parts were actually kind of funny. I'll just give you a quick example. At some point, there's this helicopter that drops a bomb and it explodes in front of a person. And so the damage that it causes is that this person's hand gets like blown away, but it gets blown away in a way that it flies up to the helicopter and kind of like just latches on to one of the railings of it. And it's like, nani? But yeah, it's stuff like that. So if you don't take this OVA too seriously, I think you'll have a good time. Also, I should note that the main theme song is incredibly like 80s, 90s pop music, and I was actually vibing pretty hard with it. So yeah, there's that. Also, I'm forgetting things. The best part, I guess, the gore and the monsters are actually pretty good. Like, it's pretty hardcore in my opinion. Well, hardcore, I mean, it's the one of the better type of gore that I've seen in anime. I also should note that there is a bit of ecchi in here, particularly the start of the OVA, and just the first couple of, I think maybe 10-15 minutes, but if that doesn't bother you, it's fine to watch. Now, Devilman is a series that is very well known and loved, and so it doesn't come as a surprise that it has been adapted a good couple of times. I myself actually never really took the time to look into the series, and so this OVA called Devilman Tanjou Hen, or Devilman The Birth, was actually my introduction to the series, and I actually quite liked it. The premise of the series is very interesting. Devilman centers around a boy in high school called Akira, and he has managed to, I guess, merge with a very, very powerful demon, devil, and so now he goes by the name of Devilman, and together with his friend Ryo, he tries to protect mankind from these devils who are trying to hurt a lot of people. This OVA in particular chronicles the character's origin as they try to attempt to merge with devils. Like I said, I really enjoyed the OVA. The animation was really good, especially all of the gore and the body horror. It at times was actually quite hard to take in, because there's just one point where you see quite a lot of people getting possessed merging with demons, and the transformations are quite rough on the eye, to say the least. The OVA really had, I guess, a sort of psychedelic quality to it as well, which I thought was really cool. It felt like if someone was having a particularly bad trip and was around a bunch of people, this could have been something that they would have seen. I also really liked the character designs. I thought that their clothing was actually pretty cool. Like, I wouldn't mind wearing the sweater that Ryo was wearing. Yeah, so talking about Ryo, I do have to say I did feel that he was a bit over dramatic, a bit extra at times, but I think the entire series, the entire premise of the show is rather extra as well. So it didn't really bother me all that much. In my opinion, I thought it was a bit more funny than anything else. Moving on, I have The Curse of KAZUO UMEZU, and this one is actually available on YouTube with subtitles, so I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. Anyway, this is an OVA that consists of 2 parts, both center around girls, which actually makes me think that this might be shoujo horror, because I know that UMEZU has done both shonen stuff and shoujo stuff. Nevertheless, one story is about a girl who, together with her girlfriends, goes to a haunted house to, I guess, check it out. And the other one is quite hard to explain without, I guess, spoiling it. It's about a girl and she has very weird nightmares. I think that would be a good description of it. So this was actually the first OVA that I watched, and I think that was about 4 months ago, so my memory's a bit foggy concerning it, but I did know that I really enjoyed it, but I'm not too sure how it compares to the other shows. But nevertheless, I think it's definitely worth a shot looking at it, also because it's, 2 short stories, and I guess they could serve actually as a good introduction to UMEZU's work, because there's a lot of body horror, gore going on. So if that's something you like, I would recommend this one. Then finally, I have 2 OVAs of which I'm sure these are shoujo horror. So the first one is 8 Clouds Rising. This is an adaptation of a manga about a high school boy called Fuzuchi who has incredibly strong psychic powers. Together with a college student called Nanachi, he searches for magical artifacts, and on this journey they come across a lot of supernatural beings such as demons and spirits and ghouls. This OVA in particular actually focuses on how Fuzuchi and Nanachi meet and how they came to establish their relationship as, I guess, kind of like swordman and shaman. So at the start, there really isn't a lot of, I guess, action, horror, things like that. But then towards the end, you get kind of like the main battle and how things kind of like, I guess, pop off, to say the least. And yeah, I personally thought that it was quite alright. There are a couple of intense scenes, definitely towards the end, but if I were to choose, I would have to say that I do prefer Pet Shop of Horrors, which is the last one on this list. Okay, so Pet Shop of Horrors is another shoujo horror, and this is an adaptation of a very popular series. It centers around this man called Count D, who owns a pet shop in Los Angeles, Chinatown, And the thing that's interesting about this pet shop is that the animals are rather peculiar. Very often they'll have humanoid appearances, and when Count D tries to sell these pets, he ensures that the buyers sign a contract with 3 rules, and if they were to break one of these, the contract also states that Count D will not be responsible for any of the consequences that may follow. And as you can already predict, there are always consequences that are rather dire, to say the least. A counterpart to Count D, I thought that was smart. Anyway, a counterpart to Count D is the character of Detective Leon, and he consistently gets cases assigned with very weird, peculiar circumstances. But the thing that connects all of these cases is that every single person went to Count D previously to purchase one of his pets, and so you get this, I guess, sort of cat and mouse game going on. Detective Leon trying to find out what's going on in that pet shop, and at some point they, I guess, kind of establish a sort of weird friendship as well. Anyway, there are 4 episodes, I believe, and the nice thing about this is that because you have this, I guess, setup structure of someone going to buy a pet, them breaking the rules, them having consequences, and Detective Leon trying to investigate that, they are very compact and they stand alone, and so you can hop around, watch whatever episode you are interested in without feeling like you're losing the main storyline, because that is quite subtle. The only thing I would say that's very substantial in terms of storyline is actually the blossoming friendship between Count D and Detective Leon, but it's not all that, I guess, interesting or very strong, so to speak. So yeah, I personally really enjoyed it. Like I said, I did prefer it to 8 Clouds Rising, but I do have to say though, because of the structure, I can definitely see how this can start to feel quite formulaic quite quickly, but since there are only 4 episodes, it didn't, or at least I didn't really have that experience. So yes, I would say watch it if the premise intrigues you. And yes, that was essentially everything that I wanted to talk about in this video. Let me know if there are any pieces that you're interested in or any ones that you think that I should check out. I'm always willing to add new things to my list. And as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy the content that I make on my channel, perhaps consider supporting me by joining my Patreon. I have a Discord where we talk about all sorts of things. We have manga, knitting, I have a book club there as well, and all of that starts from the first tier, which is $1. You can also help me out by getting me a coffee. And if not, you can also just like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification button. All of that helps tremendously. And I'm always very thankful and grateful for all of the support that I'm receiving and have received over time. Yeah. So, like I said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in another video. Cheers!